By default, the timeline in Title Studio is elastic. That means the title on your NLE timeline can be expanded or contracted, and any animations at the start or end of the title will still work. This isn't always ideal, as I'll explain later. In this short tutorial, I'll demonstrate an important Title Studio feature that's useful for managing title and lower third animations. It's called rigid runs. Its purpose is to ensure that, if required, animations will remain at a fixed duration, irrespective of the duration of the title. Keep watching and you'll see how they work. It won't take long. I'm using Title Studio within Continuum 2022. Your UI may be different. As an example, on the timeline, I have a text string entry with a total duration of 6 seconds. I'm going to create a simple animation at the start and end of the timeline. The animations will be 1 second in length. With the CTI at the start of the timeline and the shape track selected, I'll add a keyframe. At this keyframe, I'll move the text string just off the display on the left. Don't forget to change the interpolation mode for the position X parameter from constant. I'll use decelerate. I can now place the CTI at the 1 second mark and add a keyframe. At this keyframe, the text should be on the screen at its final position, so I'll use the Interactor to do that. If the Interactor isn't visible, use the position X parameter. Again, don't forget to change the interpolation mode. At this point, I want the text to remain on screen until the next animation, so I'll change the mode to hold. It's a good idea to check out the animation now to make sure that it's good. I'll now create the same animation in reverse at the end of the timeline. I can do this reasonably simply. I'll start by moving the CTI to a position 1 second before the end of the timeline. In this case, that's at the 5 second mark. I now add a keyframe at this point and change the interpolation mode. This time I'll change it to accelerate. At the end of the timeline, I'll add another keyframe. At this point, the text should be off the display again, so I'll go back to the first keyframe and copy it. I can now move to the last keyframe and paste. As you can see, for some unknown reason, there isn't an option to paste in the context menu. You have to use Ctrl+V to paste. Now, with keyframes that are situated at the end of the timeline, the interpolation mode isn't important, providing it's something other than constant or none. Having said that, I think it's good practice to set the mode to hold. I'll now play the timeline to check that the animations are good. So that's the lower third template created. If I want to reuse that template multiple times on my NLE timeline, I simply change the text string for each occurrence. Now, that's fine, but chances are that I'll want different durations for some of them. Without rigid runs, each lower third would have animations of different durations, and this may not be desirable. Without any rigid runs, let's see what happens if I increase the timeline to, say, 12 seconds. I'm using the standalone version of Title Studio, so I can increase the timeline by entering a value into the total time field. Of course, when using the plugin version, the timeline duration is fixed by the event length in your NLE. At first glance, nothing seems to have changed. The keyframes appear to be in the same position, but of course they're not. If I move the CTI to the second keyframe, which was at the 1 second mark, it's now at the 2 second mark. Similarly, the third keyframe, which was at the 5 second mark, is now at the 10 second mark. Doubling the timeline period has doubled the animation period. We'll go back to the 6 seconds timeline now. I'm now going to create 2 rigid runs, one for each animation. This is done by right-clicking on the bar above the timeline scale and selecting Add Rigid Run. A gap in the bar will be created, starting at the CTI position, and will have a duration of 20% of the total timeline duration. If you need the rigid run to be longer, simply click and hold at the end of the run and drag to the right until the desired length is achieved. In this particular case, the run is just about right. It totally encompasses the animation duration. I'll now set up the second rigid run. I'll now increase the timeline to 12 seconds again. You'll see that the keyframes have apparently moved. This is because the rigid run has forced them to remain at the same time frame. I'll step through the keyframes to demonstrate. The rigid runs have preserved the original duration of the animations. Multiple rigid runs can be added to the timeline. For example, to preserve the duration of any effects that occur other than at the start and end of the timeline. I forgot to place the CTI. They can be resized by dragging either end and can be moved by clicking and holding, then dragging to the required position. They can be removed by right-clicking and selecting Remove Rigid Run. To remove all rigid runs, right-click and select Reset to Elastic. True multi-title management isn't supported by Title Studio, but some sort of management can be achieved by utilizing rigid runs. So, if you intend to add multiple animated lower thirds to your NLE timeline using the same template, it's important to include rigid runs. By doing this, all title animations will be consistent in length. Join me for my next tutorial in this series, exploring the many powerful features of Title Studio. As always, thanks for watching. Bye for now.